And now it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Stacy Klingler.
Thanks, Adam. My name is Stacy Klingler. I'm the chair of AASLH's Small Museums Committee. I want to start by telling you a little bit about AASLH, if you don't know it, the American Association for State and Local History. This is a professional development group that provides leadership service and support for its members. You can see the website address there. If you, all of us, to get to meet and know each other. Looks like we have a couple notes here, which Adam has pretty much covered. The only thing we'll ask you to note is make sure your computer is not muted. So hopefully folks who are seeing this on their screen and not hearing anything, they'll be able to see that they need to turn their computer on, turn their speakers on, and if all else fails, if you're having trouble along the way, just close the whole virtual classroom and start it up again, and hopefully we'll get things going for you. This is me. I like to introduce myself with my photo because, hey, you can put a name with a face. I've been chair of the Small Museums Committee for the last 4 years. I am currently the Assistant Director for Local History Services at the Indiana Historical Society, which means that I work with small museums and local history groups around the state of Indiana. One of the big initiatives that the Small Museums Committee has recently launched is the Small Museum Online Community blog place where you can come and meet your colleagues in a virtual way, ask questions, find out about great resources that are there, reflect on your work in small museums. And we also host a few events every year, and we've been focusing on deaccessioning this year. We know that it's a hot topic. We see it at state, regional, and national conferences. We know that you might talk about it over lunch with your colleagues or with board members. The Connecting to Collections online community has reported that it's a topic that folks are very much interested in. We know that we're running out of space, we're running out of money, we're running out of time, and deaccessioning feels like a good solution, and in some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. This is actually the second part of deaccessioning. It's not a 4-letter word. Our part 1 was with Ann Ackerson of the Museum Association of New York. It focused on ethical and legal issues. And there is a link available to that recorded event on the Small Museum Online community, and I'll put that up in the chat area as well. But today we are lucky enough to have the Parks with their deaccessions. She's going to start us off with some definitions and move us through the process of deaccessioning today. But before I get to her, I do want to know a little bit more about you. I'm going to put a couple polls up here on the screen. And the first one here is, are you a member of AASLH? And the second one is, are you watching by yourself or with other folks? We'd like to know a little bit about who's doing this sort of thing. So there you go. I see that you've got folks logging in there. And it's great to see we've got good membership friends. We do hope that these webinars and the online community is a place where you can get to know your colleagues and have a place to, bounce ideas off each other. So, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and close those polls. A couple other questions for you. How did you find out about this event today? This is new for us, and so we are wondering where it is you heard about us. Uh-oh, those others. If you've got another down there, if you wouldn't mind typing that into the chat area, that would be great. I would really appreciate that. And my last question for you before I turn it over to Kathy is if you are a member of the online community now, the Small Museum online community. Well, it's good to know that we're getting at you in lots of different ways. We'll keep trying to send information out about these events in the online community elsewhere. And I do see that about half of you are members of the online community. For the other half of you who aren't, we would love to have you join us. I'll put some information about that in the chat, and we'll talk about it at the end of the event. But I know that what you really care about is learning more about deaccessioning. And so I am going to turn it over to our resident expert, Kathleen, after I get her beautiful presentation up here for you all to see. All right, take it from here, Kathleen. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. As Stacy said, I work for the National Park Service. I serve as the museum registrar for the Park Service, and though because we're very site-specific, so a lot of our museums are not very much larger than yours, even though we're a large government organization. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about deaccessioning and its role in collections management. And over the years, I've assisted a lot of National Park Service parks staff with deaccessions, and I work at what's called the NPS Clearinghouse, which is a source of material for other institutions and other parks. So I've done quite a few deaccessions myself. So I'm hoping I can give you the benefit of some of my several years of experience on this. I will say I put this slideshow together, and my husband, who thinks he's really funny, got a hold of it, and so he changed the title slide, which you're not seeing right now. He changed it to Deaccessioning, a very unpleasant museum experience. And then at the bottom, he put, "You'll see." But it is a necessary museum practice, and I hope to go over the procedures that we've put in place in the Park Service and that we've tested over the years, and that are working for us, and hopefully they'll be of some use for you, especially if you haven't really started in this whole process of deaccessioning. The first slide, this is a exhibit at Gettysburg National Military Park, and I think one of the reasons museum staff are hesitant to discuss deaccessions is because a very good reference, the legal primer on managing museum collections. In her book, begins the chapter on deaccessioning collections with these words: "Little more than a decade ago, there were many who did not accept the practice of deaccessioning. They viewed museums essentially as mausoleums dedicated to preserving intact the accumulations of successive generations. Collecting, however, is not a mechanical process. It is a combination of intelligent selection, thoughtful pruning. Periodic reevaluation is as important as acquisition, and deaccessioning, if properly used, can be a means toward true growth." So you see the slide here, deaccessioning museum collections runs counter to main purposes of museums, which are to acquire and preserve collections for the benefit of future generations through exhibition, interpretation, and research. So we don't generally think of museums as disposing of objects, but it's a legal practice at many places. This list I have up here is the types of deaccessions that the National Park Service is authorized to do. Some museums, and yours may be one of them, some museums are not authorized to deaccession anything. And for a long time, we also were prevented from donating outside the federal government, and various things that we can now do. We had an amendment to the law so that we had a little bit more leeway on how we could deaccession collections. So what you can and can't do should be stated in your governing legislation or your collection management policies. And these things, almost everybody experiences at some point or other in their career, loss or theft. And loss here would be an unintentional loss, such as fire, flood, insect infestations, or just sometimes things are just plain missing. And we consider this involuntary destruction. Theft can also be included in this category, although hopefully sometimes we get those materials back. But this is one that, is outside your control, and if things are lost, eventually you want to get them off the books, off the museum books, and do a deaccession, because something is in such bad shape that it just would cost too much to conserve it, and it just is not worth, at this point, the time and the funds to maintain that particular item in your collection. Now, this is not to say there is an art museum right now in Italy that's burning their paintings to protest cuts in funding to the arts. That's not what I mean by deterioration. I mean just inherent vice. Things do deteriorate sometimes over time. And the third bullet, hazardous material. This is something, if you have something in your collection that's a real danger, you don't want to go through the lengthy procedures that we're going to be talking about in this presentation. You're going to want to have hazmat professionals come in and handle this. We had some unexploded ordnance in our collection that we didn't even know about, but we had to get the Army in right away and get that material out. And that is one where you're not going to go through a lot of procedures. You need to think of human safety first. Now, the fourth bullet here, this is the one that a lot of people, and this is what I work with a lot of times, is the outside scope. You have to have a scope of collections before you can be outside of it. And I do know that a lot of museums do have collections policies, and some of them have not yet gotten around to doing that. And that many museums in the past had undefined collecting. So they took anything. And some of those objects no longer serve a purpose. They cost you money. They take up storage space. You have to care for them. And the museum storage space, as we all know, is very expensive. It's at a premium. And it's also an inefficient use of staff time to care for collections that don't fit the PARF scope or that are damaged beyond repair, as in the deteriorated or damaged condition. And that's one of the reasons we say it's a necessary museum practice, because it's not efficient to have things that are not needed by the museum. Now, return to right, you don't have any good paperwork. You don't have a deed of gift or another document that acknowledges that the museum actually owns the material, a lot of times with older material. And this is tricky because if you no longer want the object and the owner wants it back, simple solution is to return it. But the problem is that it sets a precedent, and it sets a very bad precedent, because if you return things to one person who requests them, then others may request things that you don't want to give up. And how do you, as a public institution, rationalize, favoritism over one person over another? And how do you establish who's the owner when there's no paperwork? So, framework for why you're making that decision. Destructive analysis. This is usually done with natural history or archaeology, and there needs to be a valid research question as to, why are we going to destroy this this piece or this specimen? And the importance of the test results should outweigh the loss of the specimen. And there are more and more advanced ways of analyzing things so that things don't have to be totally destroyed. So there needs to be a valid research question before you would approve destructive analysis. And the last one is the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act. This is a separate law. It has separate procedures which require Federal Register notice. And we could do a whole session on that alone. We're not going to be discussing that today. And it really applies to federal agencies that receive or agencies that receive federal funds. And probably some of you are very involved in NECRA and some of you are not. But it is...
There's actually a couple questions in the chat box you might want to address. The bottom one there from Martha about returning to the rightful owner using in long-term loan situations.
Returning to rightful, no, long-term loan is just return of a loan. Returning to rightful owner is something that we probably never should have had to begin with, that we didn't have the correct paperwork. So, and we are getting requests for things back, but then a lot of times it is not the owner, it's the heirs, or people who say they're the heirs, and then they have to be able to prove that they are the sole heir, and they have the right to request it.
There was also another question, is redundancy or duplication a valid reason to deaccession as well?
Yes, it is, and I'll get into that in a little bit when we talk about collections, scope of collections. That can be in your scope. Which isn't surprising, because every institution, if it's been around for any period of time, will have probably at least a few things that probably should never have come there in the first place. So I'm not surprised at that. Okay, so what is the best deaccessioning policy? Obviously, it's a good accessioning policy. You need to have established a good accessions policy before considering deaccessioning. You don't want to go in and say, okay, we're going to start, getting rid of things in the collection unless you have a real good established accessions policy. And your collection policy needs to be based on your mission statement. And it needs to be written, and it needs to be approved by the governing body. It should state what types of material you're going to collect and how many of each type. So that's where we're talking about redundancy. We don't have to collect every mini ball. these collections policies in place in the past, and that's where a lot of our problems are, which we'll talk about later, are things found in the collection. Your accessioning policy needs to be reviewed. It needs to be updated periodically because things change. Themes of and subject matter changes in museums depending on, you know, the time period that you are historically. You may be changing your focus at the museum. But once you have an established collections policy, you have a justification for not accepting everything that is offered. And you can say to, you know, potential donors, I think it would fit better. It doesn't fit our policy, but it, you know, maybe it would be better over here. You could try here, but you have a reason for saying, we have something in place. It's signed by our governing body, and we can't accept material like that. You also need to consider, when you're writing this policy, whether the museum has the facilities to care for the objects. You don't want to be bringing things in if you are not able to care for them. And consider your maintenance costs, especially with large items which are very hard to store and care for. And then finally, you shouldn't be accessioning collections in order to use them, and it's very poor public relations. Okay, let's do some basic definitions before we get into the procedures. Accessioning, process of officially accepting items into the collection, its legal ownership. You want to make sure when you accession, it's very important to get as much information as possible as you can at the time of accessioning, because a lot of times you can't get it later, and I'm always emphasizing to parks, ask questions when you're accessioning so you have that information for your files. Deaccessioning is the process of permanently removing objects from the collection. You need to check your laws and your charter to make sure you can deaccession. Do you have the authority? We are not, for example, we are not allowed to sell. We are definitely not allowed to sell collections, and many museums do have that authority. We're also not allowed to deaccession systematic collections, which are collections collected as part of a project, an archaeology project or a natural history project. We're not allowed to deaccession those types of collections. So you need to know what you can and can't deaccession. And then so you can, you may do something out of scope, and it may be a transfer, it may be exchange, it may be a donation, it may even actually be voluntary destruction. So there are different disposal options for objects depending on the type of deaccession that you're doing. I'm looking over here to see if I have any more questions, but it looks like we're good so far. Scope of collections. I can't talk enough or emphasize enough about this collections policy that you want to have in place. And you see the little pictures. Yes, we want the teapot, but we don't want the canteen. A museum, this is your museum planning document, and it's derived from your mission, and it defines what you're going to take in. The second bullet here is also extremely important. It's one of the most important components of deaccessioning. You never want one person making all the decisions. That's a red flag, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. You want to have some sort of committee or some sort of group of subject matter experts, other curators or trustees or whoever they need to do this for all deaccessions and also for accessions. And that's just being smart. You don't have one person making these decisions, or you can run into a lot of trouble. I have a question here. How does one find people qualified for a collections committee? We're going to talk about that in a future slide here. Many people abandoning objects that we do not accession. May we sell them? That depends on your authorities and what is governing your museum. I can't really answer that. I'm trying to think of an answer to that, and I may have to come back to that later. Should we have outside persons help on the collections committee? Yes, and we're going to talk about how you put the committee together. We in the federal government are not allowed to have non-federal people actually make decisions, make the actual decision, but we can get them for experienced advice. What is the difference between a gift and a donation? Nothing. They're the same thing. If you're the only cultural person on staff, yes. Okay, I will get to the committee, and I will tell you a lot about the committee in a future slide here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the accession actions must do. They must meet the highest level of legal and ethical standards. And you need to be consistent with relevant laws and with your current museum policies. Avoiding real or apparent conflict of interest. Believe me, apparent conflict of interest can be as bad as real conflict of interest. You don't even want the appearance of a conflict of interest. And that is obviously is much more aware of deaccessioning than they were in the past. And they're watching things, and you can get some very, very bad PR. And the last bullet here, you need to make sure your actions are justified by your catalog data and the written justification for why you're getting rid of this. You want to have a really good paper trail. And I just lost my network connectivity. Adam?
Yeah, I'm right
and
here
he is
with
doing
people.
his magic here to
Yeah.
get it. And let's see. Okay, I'm back.
Perfect.
Okay, here's some things that deaccession actions should do. They should keep the objects in public ownership whenever possible. Community considerations are important. And community, I know a lot of museums are transparent and discuss with community members if appropriate. And I'm going to talk about, things you can do to make people aware of what you're doing and so that they understand what's going on at the museum and not thinking that you're doing things, sneakily behind their backs. You want to avoid the perception that the action is being made in accordance with current fads or fashions. And you want to preserve the integrity of systematic collections, which are collections that are done by project-based collections. And that we can't sell. Every museum text is going to say you want to use funds from sales, if you do sales, only for other collections or care of collections. You're not using them for toilet paper or adding restrooms or putting a new roof on the museum. You're going to use it for collections care or for purchasing other collections or acquiring other collections. Okay, deaccessioning procedures.
Before we go there, Amy Sanderson asked if it was reasonable for the deaccession decision to be dependent on disposal method. What are your thoughts about that?
It does somewhat depend, and I will talk about that a little more. Depending on what you're doing, yes, if you're doing a deaccession for something that's lost or stolen, you're going to go through very different procedures, and but you're still going to have certain.
Oh, sounds like we're having a little issue with Kathy there. I'll do a little talking, and Adam, if you could let Kathy know that she has been logged off. So in terms of, if we go back to Amy's question, I wonder, Amy, if you might share with us a little bit more about what that dependence might be. If you're saying we wouldn't accession, but then we just take our time with our disposal, that would be my general philosophy on that. Amy Gramsey asked about whether or not it was okay to have volunteers acquire deaccession in a sale or auction. And there, theoretically, it might be okay, but there could be some serious issues with appearance of conflict of interest. If those volunteers have any say in whether or not something gets deaccessioned, or people might think they have a say in whether or not something gets deaccessioned, then there could be,
We had a brownout.
Oh, of course. I was just talking about Amy's question about volunteers acquiring deaccessions in a sale or auction, and saying that the appearance of conflict of interest or real conflict of interest might be a real issue there.
Yes, I would say so. Okay, I'm looking at the poll question. Do you have deaccession procedures in place? Excellent. 74% of you do, so that's very good, because that is something that you have to have. And that's what we're going to be talking about.
All right, I'll move that poll out of your way.
Good, that's good news. Okay, you've got to have these procedures. You've got to have them written, and you have to have written procedures for each type of deaccession. And there are different, if you can come up with checklists. We're doing checklists for our parks so that they can just go down, okay, I've done this step, this step, this step, or even flow charts to follow these procedures. because what you want to do is make sure you have a paper trail to show what was done. And I don't know if every museum gets audited, but we get audited in the Park Service, and if they ask you why this procedure, why you deaccession something, you better be able to pull out all the paperwork or pull it up on the screen to show them what exactly was done. So what can go wrong? And you probably all know what can go wrong. This is old from the 1920s, Yosemite, one of our first museums. This is back then. You can see by the clothing, and people are looking at an exhibit at Yosemite. But and I really like that picture. You can get bad publicity. Any of these things can go wrong. You can lose donors. You can have your community very upset with you. You can actually have allegations of unethical conduct, and you can actually be legally prosecuted, and people have actually gone to jail for doing deaccessions that were not legal or ethical. So, you don't want to do anything like that. How do you keep these things from happening? Well, number one, deaccessions should not be easy. You shouldn't be able to go in and, well, I'll do a deaccession a day and you get it over with. They're not easy. They're not because you can plan your time and your progress, and you can see some progress, because we've had deaccessions that actually took several years to go through because of different people commenting on them and problems, but they're not easy. They also require thoughtful consideration, and they require good documentation. For those people coming after you, so that they don't inherit things that you inherited when you open a folder and it's blank, in case of an audit. So you need a paper trail, and at this time I would still recommend paper, but if you're going electronic, you need to have a migration plan so that that information is migrated so that it can be available at all times. So we're talking about the documentation that you need. Parks always ask me, why do I have to catalog something if I'm getting rid of it? Well, the answer is, how can you justify getting rid of something if you don't document what it is? If you don't know what it is, how can it be out of your time period if you don't know the time period? So we require that anything that is accession that's going to be deaccession needs to be cataloged. If you're advertising for recipients of that teapot that's being photographed, that you have a photograph that you can send around so people can take a look at it. One of the most important things for things that are being deaccessioned is condition. People want to know, it's really important to potential recipients because they don't want to go through a lot of conservation to get something ready that, for their use. So it's also good to document deterioration if you intend to destroy objects, so that you have some kind of report. This is a formal conservation report on a table, but some kind of condition needs to be established for what you're going to deaccession. So once you have all your documents, if a committee is going to say, yes, this is well thought out, it needs to be clearly outlined, and it really needs to be written by the curator or collection manager, and it needs to be very convincing and show that you've researched everything and that you know what you're talking about and why you want to get rid of this particular piece. And then it's good to have an order of preference. And that's another thing, that when you have these things in place, it makes it look very official. We have a procedure for deaccessioning, and we have an order of preference for how we're going to dispose of things. So the Park Service, our order of preference is, first it would go to another park, then it would go to some other bureau in the Department of Interior, then it would go to another federal government entity. And you could have any kind of preference. Happens all the time. You need to be able to provide a written justification for why you went out of that order of preference. It's just one more thing that makes this process very formal and makes it legitimate. And I see do you have a question up there, Stacy? You're not getting my audio?
No, you were talking to me. I had mine muted.
Oh, okay, okay.
There was just a conversation about examples, so you can keep going.
I thought maybe I browned out again because it's hard for me to tell. Okay, one other form of documentation I want to talk about is the need for an appraisal Civil War piece, so it's very expensive. And appraisals aren't needed for everything, but they really should be used if you're going to do an exchange, so that you can determine that the exchange is equitable. I've seen some exchanges that were just atrocious, where something really valuable was exchanged for something that was not nearly in the same value. And we need 2 written appraisals. But it's a good thing to have, especially if you're dealing with things of high monetary value, is to get an appraisal. So now we're going to talk about this collection committee, which a lot of you had questions about. You're ready to send your package. Oh, and here we have a question. Do you have a collections committee? And I hope we get a lot of... Good, 70%. That's very good. So you're ready to send your deaccession package to the collections committee to review the deaccession proposal. And what the committee does, it allows for systematic review by subject matter experts, and it protects you, the curator, and the board or the director from accusations of partiality, because not just one person is making this decision. And your committee can be made up of members that change depending on your subject matter. And members can be chosen by the board or the director or even the curator. And what they're going to do is, this is a form that we have that we send out, and then the committee members, there's a justification at the top, and then they write whether they recommend or they don't recommend and why they do. And everything is documented. So you have this documentation that's part of your deaccession package. And committee does... Hi, I'm back. It appears that we've been having some technical difficulties, and I'm going to try to get through this very quickly. I had much more material than I really have time for. So we're talking about who needs to approve the deaccessions. And someone had asked earlier, does every deaccession need to go through the same procedures? And obviously there are some, depending on your institution, there can be cases where the curator approves the deaccession.
Ooh, and it looks, or sounds like we have another brownout that's popped in on us. Don't worry, the sound is gone because the speaking has just paused for a moment. So we're going to get that back in, and we'll try again. And in the meantime, if there is anyone who is having issues with the online room starting to jar or slow down, please go ahead and try connecting your computer via hardwire or Ethernet cable. Chances are you might be on a wireless network, which can cause fluctuations with the online room itself. The audio, on the other hand, is a little bit more weather related. So give us just one moment and we'll sort that out and get you back.
Hello, everybody. So sorry about the loss of the conference call sound. I hope that you're hearing me now. If folks want to put an affirmative there in the chat and say, yes, we're hearing you now, that would be great. I am going to let Kathleen come back to a couple of these slides, but I'm going to talk about a couple of issues that folks brought up in the first version of this workshop that we did, and I do apologize for that technical issue. And this is something that obviously came up in some of the chats that you were looking at there, and that is the issue of poor current records when your museum has been around for 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, and you don't have deeds of gift, you don't have formal museum records in your documentation of them. And this can also be true for just items found in the collection. And the primary strategy to work with that is using your state's abandoned property laws. almost every state has an abandoned property law, and some states have specifically museum property laws that deal with property that's either left on your doorstep, the doorstop donation, the infamous doorstop donation, or property that you find in your collection and you don't have any records for, or property that you have some records for but they're incomplete. You don't actually have title. And there's usually a process that you go into where you post a public notice, usually in a newspaper, of the items that you have and the information you have about them. There's usually a waiting period and a second posting. You have to spend some time documenting how long, or staff who've been around for a while. Ultimately, if you're going to go through this process, you probably want to work with a lawyer. If you get a pro bono lawyer, that's great. Or talk with your State Museum Association or your Field Service Office. Those are two groups that will probably know about the abandoned property laws, and if there's a museum-specific property law, that would be useful. And Linda Endersby asked, is there any strategy for funding the cost of the newspaper notices? And I have not heard of anybody who's come up with a creative strategy for this, because this is one of the stumbling blocks, is that it can be quite expensive to post those notices in the newspaper. And I've not heard anyone be creative. I'm hoping maybe somebody out there is going to have a creative solution for Linda, whether that's getting those donated by the newspaper or possibly looking at having a sponsored sort of thing. So that's what I can tell you about poor records. Deaccessioning. A lot of issues that have happened in the past is the board is just uncomfortable with the idea of getting rid of anything in the collection, or perhaps there are volunteers or staff members who just say, we accepted it, we need to keep it. That there might be donors in the community who have given objects in the past that don't fit with the mission, and now you're faced with the possibility of them getting cranky with you. And then there is the idea that there have been we're having exciting slide fun here. Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm going to try to get back to our slide. The idea that past deaccessions have given the museum a bad name, that somehow you've tried to do those deaccessions and is being as transparent as possible and starting an education campaign early. We tend to want to deaccession in quiet because we think, if we let folks know that we're deaccessioning, they're going to be unhappy with us, and it's going to be a PR nightmare. Well, if you think about when somebody does something that you don't like and they try to cover it up, it's much worse. So being as public as possible about it, to talk about the reasons why you need to deaccession, to talk about all those valid reasons that Kathleen brought out there. You could do a series in your newsletter, you could do a series in the newspaper about this. And really, you think about the items that you're protecting in your collection that don't belong there are drawing resources away from the really, really important items that are in your collection. If you are spending your time and your money maintaining an archive of newspapers, which is a duplicate, that's quite a bit. Also, when it comes to resistance, the idea of having good documentation, you're probably going to make somebody angry, but overall, if you do a good education strategy, you won't make everybody angry. So that is our best piece of the puzzle for that. I'm looking in the questions here. And we're seeing if we can't get Kathleen back on. I am going to actually go ahead and ask you all to participate in one more poll about a deed of gift using an unrestricted clause. Looks like most folks are saying that that's true for them, and that gives you the option of of using the collection and deaccessioning in a way, when you're letting folks know up front, when you're putting that in the documents they sign when they give you the items, you're being very clear with them that the idea of deaccessioning is a possibility. So you've started that up front. And I am going to hold off on addressing accessioning by mistake. I'm actually hoping Martha might fill me in a little bit more on what she means by that question. As I review sort of your top priority, you need to have the good collections policy in place that will most likely include a deaccessioning policy and possibly deaccessioning procedures. Once you've got that collections policy, you've got to go out and seek that collections committee. And that collections committee broadly representing your community, even if they're not board members, or hopefully they'll be museum members, but if they're folks who are reflective of your community, then they're going to help you make good decisions. I will see. Collections committee education and qualifications. Well, it's probably going to depend on what kind of museum you are. If you are a local town museum, then you want folks on your committee who have a good knowledge of the town, a good knowledge of the history of the town, and who represent what your town looks like. And that may be by gender or by ethnicity or by class or by career. There's lots of ways in which you could balance that.
This is Kathy. No, not Kathleen.
We have Kathy Lang, who is our...
You don't have to have every person on your committee weigh in on every deaccession. You should be able to, if you have somebody that knows about, pottery or whatever, they could be in on a deaccession for that kind of material. But you don't have. You can have like what is called a flexible collection committee. If that makes any sense.
That does make sense.
Hi, Kat. This is Kathleen. I got a message to leave. So I left.
Did she leave and she's come back? Now we have Kathleen to help us answer our last questions. Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind trying to sum up what's important, and then we might try to answer a couple questions that we've been facing. It is 3 o'clock, and I know some folks may need
collection policy, obviously, because you need to know what you are going to be collecting in order to know what you're not going to be collecting or what you don't need in your collection any longer. And you can't really justify getting rid of things unless you know exactly what your collection policy is. You also want to have that committee because you do not want to be making these decisions by yourself. And that should be for obvious reasons. You do not want it coming back on your back if there's a problem. There needs to be a well-established committee that made sound judgments as to whether this particular piece or pieces can be deaccessioned. You want to have things in written form or electronic form that is their written procedures and forms that you follow. You want to have good documentation, obviously, from everybody. This is a legitimate practice, and you are doing that. You are doing that. You're following the practice. You're following the procedures, and you want to be able to make a plan of attack. You want to sit down, and I saw that a lot of you have things you need at the accession. You need to sit down and know what those things are and how you're going to decide what type of deaccession it's going to be, how you're going to go through with those procedures. And maybe you need to write procedures first. Maybe you need to get your collection policy in place, but you can come up with a plan of work to get this done. So I'm going to look at some of the questions here on the side.
We had a question about deaccessioning or accessioned by mistake. I think Lisa Foster's.
Yes, accession by mistake is a very tricky one. We allow that in the park material. You have to have a definition of what is museum quality material. And if it's museum material, no, it can't be deaccessioned by mistake. If it's obviously, we have a lot of living history things that are being used, so they're not museum material, but somehow they got put in the collection, or exhibit props. And I often say to people, if it's in an exhibit and the exhibit is closed down, is this something you would put in your storage area? Well, no. If it's not, then it really isn't museum material. It's just there as a prop to fill out your exhibit. And so I get a lot of questions on this, and I have to sometimes say no, you can't use this procedure, or sometimes yeah, we could use it. And it's a lot easier because you don't have to go through all the steps. But for most museum material, you have to go through the deaccessioning steps.
Also, Kathy, could
we just have a clause in our deed of gift, and if I can pull it down and find it real quick, where they check off and they say, I understand that this is being, I'll read it to you. We do hereby irrevocably and unconditionally give, assign, and deliver to the National Park for its unrestricted use all right, title, and interest into and associated with the items listed below. So, you obviously, most museums do not want restrictions. You don't want somebody saying it always has to be on exhibit or it has to be always in the front room. But you don't, if something is given to your museum, you want to have unrestricted use. And if you have that, then that gives you a little more leeway if in the future, for some reason, it's material that might need to be deaccessioned, or you might want to deaccession it.
All right, and it looks like we've got a couple other folks who have put some examples there in the chat box.
Okay. Yes, okay, yeah, unconditional donation, that's good.
Kathy, I covered poor records and resistance a little bit. If you are interested in talking about...
I was giving the whole presentation. Okay, do you want me to back up?
Right, if you would handle these two slides, I talked about resistance and the other one. If you want to go ahead and talk about time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I get from people is it takes too long, and I don't have staff. I don't have time to do this research because you have to do some research on these things, and I have a lot of other things to do. I'd like to get rid of this material, but I don't have the time to do it. So, you just have to make a plan. If you have a lot of objects that have gone missing over years, you're doing your inventory and a few things are missing, you can put all those on one deaccession. You can make that one transaction. We're going to get rid of this material that we no longer have. So you can come up with some ways to combine things, but you want to come up with what your goals are. You want to deaccession. What are the steps I need to take, and how long is each of these steps going to take? And then you can see some progress as you go along. But as I said, it's not meant to be a very quick process. And obviously you had the things in your collection probably for years. So they're not going to disappear, in a matter of weeks. It takes a little bit of time. And the last one here, did you do recipients?
No, I did not. Go ahead.
Okay. It is sometimes hard to find a recipient institution. Now that we have the internet, that makes it a lot easier. You can go in. We did that with a printing press that Women's Rights had that we were trying to find a home for. You can also put notices out on websites. And then this last bullet here, what if the objects are just plain junk? And we obviously don't like to say we have just plain junk, but some of us do. And you might want to establish procedures for voluntary destruction. And we are now allowed, if we have gone through all the other procedures and precedents, if we still have material, we are actually allowed to destroy that material. We have to have a witness to that destruction. And that's a scary step, and I'm getting ready to take that step with several things that I have here in what we call the clearinghouse that are just, no one would want them. They're broken, they're dirty, and we're going to go through with the voluntary destruction of those things. But that is, like your ultimate step that you may have to do if the material, no one...
Kathleen, why is it that you want to have somebody observe the voluntary destruction?
That is a government requirement. So that, and I think it is because then you're not taking it home. Somebody's seeing that it's actually destroyed and not put in the dumpster, and somebody else comes along and picks it up.
So nobody is benefiting from the fact that it was...
Nobody is benefiting. And sometimes, and this was a case that came up with us, we were doing an exchange, and I was very nervous because we can't exchange with private individuals. Well, no sooner had we done that exchange that it was up on a website that the Park Service has disposed of this and this and questions. And so if things are, people say, oh, well, we went in the dumpster and there they were throwing things out. You want to be very careful of that. And if they're actually destroyed and there's a witness of that destruction, that avoids that problem.
We also had some questions sort of generally about the PR around this. And so I don't know if you want to go back to your public advertisement or talk about that sort of how it is you share the deaccessioning process.
Sure. I don't know where I went out. So this is the public advertisement. We put an advertisement like this up for every deaccession. It's up for 45 days on our website, which we advertise. This is, you need to tell the public what you intend to donate and who you're donating it to. And I usually ask parks to explain a little bit about the place, and this is going to Historical Society, and they explain where it's located and what they do, why you're donating it, and in this case, this is outside the park scope changed, and they no longer are needing this material, and it is local material, so they want it to go to this local Historical Society. And very important, how to contact the museum if somebody has a question about this deaccession. And if it comes down to two different parties are interested in the material, then that's up to the accountable officer to decide who's going to be the recipient. And they base that on the greatest benefit to their museum and the recipient's ability to care for the objects and keep them in the public sector. So again, we have these procedures in place that say this is why we made this decision. And so that makes it, a lot more legitimate than just saying we got rid of this material because we didn't need it.
We had another question was, if the public discovers a museum is selling items, won't that prohibit a large number of future donations?
Oh, yes, I think it will. And I've had people call me and say, I want to donate my material to National Park publicity, and it can really dry up your donors. Because they're not going to want to donate to someplace if they think you're going to sell their material.
I'll go ahead and ask the group if anybody has tried selling deaccessioned items and what their experience has been. If you want to type a little bit into that chat, if anybody's had that kind of experience, how they've handled the PR issues, and we can get a little conversation going. That's also a conversation we can continue on the Small Museums online community. Since that is sort of why we've created the community in the first place. So I am going to first post, I'm going to actually ask a couple questions of the folks. I'm going to put our last two poll questions out so you can be participating in these. We'd like to know about future topics, but also what it is you plan to do now that you've you've heard this putting out there. So I've posted a link to the Small Museums online community. I'm also going to post a few other links. So if you see there, we've got a link to our event archive. So if you want to see this event again, or also see the past deaccessioning webinar we gave, you can see that there. There's a link to AASLH for membership. And then that very first link, I'm sorry that all appeared kind of wonky-jawed altogether, is some information about the Small Museums online community, how you can join and how you can sort of benefit by being part of the discussions that are there. And actually there is a discussion going on about collections policy right now that Kathleen had contributed to just a few days ago in the discussion forum section. So we really hope that we can continue this conversation as part of the Small Museum online community. And if we have that you're facing, we would love to hear from you there in the future topics, or just post a topic on that Small Museum online community. You do have to join as a member in order to post, but it's a very short and easy process. We'd love to have you join us there. Kathleen, do you have any last words of wisdom for folks?
No, I just see that there are an incredible amount of questions out there, which makes me think that this is a big topic, and people are very interested in it, and it's just sort of come to the forefront. You hear, people are talking about it now. As I said, Marie Millara said a decade ago, people didn't even mention it. And so it's really good to start thinking about it and figuring out, how you're going to address it at your institution.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathleen. We really appreciate you taking files there, and you can click on those and download them to your computer. The one on the top are the slides from today's event, and the one on the bottom are the slides from our first deaccessioning event. The first deaccessioning event has several of the resources, including the Marie Millara book.
Right, yeah.
Some other resources in that, so if you're interested in those, please download that. I will leave this up here for the next 15 or 20 minutes, so you've got time to download that. I see there's a couple more future topics coming in. And just to look at next steps, looks like we've got folks who are across the board with what their next next set of plans are. And so I hope that we've given you some of the tools you need. I did post a link to the National Park Service Museum Handbook earlier in the chat, and you all can use the little bar next to that chat to scroll up and see the links and other things that were there. That is a great resource. Sometimes what the National Park Service does is a little more intense. Thank the National Park Service on behalf of all of us for the work that you all have done to make your handbooks public and share that information with us. All right. Well, feel free to keep typing in those future topics, to continue in the chat, and to download those deaccessioning presentations. If anybody's got any questions about how to download those, put those in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that via online. But we'll take our audio off the air and wish you all a very happy July 18th, and hope that rain comes to all of you soon. And have a great, great day. Good luck with your deaccessioning.